Mitosis Lab Assessments by Steve Leonard. Lab assessing. In the past, we teachers have assessed our lab students after the lab unit. However, as we learned in this ESC class, assessment and instruction are intertwined. Both my student and I, as the teacher, will benefit. My lab assessing methods. There's the pre-assessment, formative assessment, which is the assessment for learning, and the summative assessment. It's an assessment of learning. Pre-lab assessment. I feel the intent behind pre-assessment is to evaluate what my students know about a mitosis lab before entering the lab. Pre-assessments will help me as a lab teacher determine flexible grouping patterns, and I hope to employ this regularly. I would employ this especially in the safety. If I have students that understood lab safety, I would group them with students that didn't quite understand lab safety. Okay, the pre-assessment strategies I would like to employ would be a mitosis checklist, pre-test on a mitosis, KWL charts, graphic organizers, student discussions, student lab demonstrations, student work samples. I'd have a show of hands, standardized test data, my lab observation, writing prompts would be in class, writing examples. Lab assessment for the formative assessment. I think we all agree this kind of assessment isn't about accountability. It is about my students getting better. What can be assessed in a mitosis lab? Some of the achievement targets I'd like to focus on: the mitosis knowledge mastery. What have they learned? What have they kept? What can they recall? Reasoning proficiency of my lab. Lab performance abilities. Do they follow the instructions? Do they use safety? And the ability to replicate the lab results that I as a teacher in New York State is looking for. These are some formative assessment lab strategies that I could incorporate. We could do in-class conferencing, cooperative learning activities that are available, mitosis demonstrations, exit cards, graphic organizers. My favorite I like is what I learn in the mitosis lab statement at the end of the day, or I could get it from the lab journal entries. We could do science learning logs, oral lab surveys, oral on the spot presentations, actually ask one of the kids. We could do lab peer evaluations. I could do problem solving activities, mitosis questions, quiz on mitosis, response groups, or lab end self-evaluations that would be incorporated in the lab journal. Now the next one is the summative lab assessment. A summative lab assessment evaluation is created to supply information to help me make conclusions about my students' achievement at the conclusion of the mitosis lab. These can include final lab draft attempts, exams, quizzes, assignments, tasks, and the performance of the actual lab. This is a method to help me determine my students' mastery and an understanding of this mitosis lab, the abilities, ideas, and tasks that they can form. These are summative assessment strategies for the mitosis lab. I would do mitosis testing, lab performance tasks if they were followed, did they meet the lab results, would they demonstrate a knowledge to me, and I would do a lab or portfolio review at the end of the module. Now this is the mitosis lab assessment instruction process that I would hope to employ. The pre-assessment is finding out what the students know, teaching them what they need to do for safety. The next one is the formative assessment, checking in my students' feedback and my student involvement. And the last one, if this works, is the summative assessment, making certain that they know through testing or quizzes, feedback that I could get at the end of the lab. And that concludes my mitosis lab assessment.